So when we started planning this convention, one of the things that we wanted to do was a really dynamic and interesting a panel around equity. And we couldn't do that if we didn't have a diverse and really interesting panel for you to hear from today. And so before you is what we've called our equity panel, but it's not, they're going to be talking to you about their stories and their experiences. I'm going to introduce you to the moderator, is Adrienne Smith. Adrienne will then be going through and introducing you to the rest of the panelists. Adrienne Smith is a transgender human rights activist and social justice lawyer. Adrienne appeared at the BC Court of Appeal and the Supreme Court of Canada, where they argued about the deleterious effects of mandatory minimum sentences for women, Indigenous people, and drug users. As a trade union activist, they advocate for transgender inclusion in our unions and workplaces. Adrienne runs Adrienne Smith Law, a downtown East Side boutique law firm that offers assistance in the types of law that affect marginalized communities. They provide legal and equity services on issues including transgender inclusion, drug policy, union-side labor law, government relations, and human rights. Adrienne also worked at the Catherine White Holman Wellness Clinic, where they provide free legal advice, take on cases, and notarize name change documents for trans people. Delegates, please welcome Adrienne Smith.
Thank you, friends, for joining us. Thank you, new president. Yes, let's have some applause for all of your electeds. I'd also like to take the opportunity to recognize that we are here today on unceded and stolen, occupied territory of the Musqueam, the Tsleil-Waututh, and the Squamish people, and it is too early for reconciliation. As a person, for folks who cannot see me, I'm incandescently white, I'm even blonde, and what that means is that the system of colonial genocide exists to privilege people who look like me, and I can't speak in public without doing as Uncle Ben said to Spider-Man, which is to say that with great power comes great responsibility, and if you are benefiting from this unfair system, it's your job to dismantle it. So I'd like to call for a decolonization that necessarily includes the payment of reparations, the transfer of governance, and the return of land. I do want to introduce this fantastic panel that is here with us, but I have been inside my house for 2 years, and I know many of you also have been, and the sense of timelessness and a sense that we're in a small spaceship alone in our houses has been oppressive. And so I did some Googling very early this morning, late last night. I know some of you were awake also, and I want to thank you for being here today and for turning up for the last important panel event before you go get dressed up for dinner and attending the fantastic drag show that will happen this evening. I'm told the reception begins at 5:30, so applause for yourselves for being long-lasting, committed delegates. And I want to just rattle off some trivia about this day in history, because it is tempting to think that often you are the only one fighting the fight that you are fighting, when we have always been surrounded by allies and colleagues. And first of all, I want to recognize that it is the kickoff of the Pride season, which is still very important because today there is somebody who thinks that it is better to be dead than to be themselves. And that's why we continue to commemorate the riot that is keeping our community alive. So happy Pride. We'll be here for some time if you clap for everyone, so perhaps I'll be more brief. It is the 101st day of the Russian war in Ukraine. It is the 817th day since the global pandemic was declared in British Columbia.
And from other parts of Canada.
For other folks. It is the feast day of St. Francis of Caracciolo, who founded an order of clerks, which I feel may be appropriate for those who, like me, move papers for a living. It is the day in 1913 when Emily Davidson ran into the racetrack at the Derby at Epsom and ran in front of the horse ridden by King George V to raise awareness of the cause of women's suffrage. She wanted women to vote, and she died, and she was the first martyr for that cause. C'était aussi
It was also in 1976. It was the first day of the big day when Acadian people were attacked.
English colonies because their farmland was good and they were peace-loving people who got along with their neighbors. If you're an Anglophone who doesn't, if you're a speaker of any language who doesn't know about the Acadians, it's a significant part of our history, and the Grand Arrangement started today. This is also the day that some English sea captain called Vancouver came to this place, which is really called Kamkamale, and decided to conquer it for the crown. This is the day in 1912 when the first minimum wage bill in North America was passed in Massachusetts. This day in 1975, a California agriculture bill allowed farm workers collective agreement rights. This is the day that the Tiananmen Square protest was put down with violence. This is the day in 1919 when the One Big Union was founded in Calgary, and this is the International Day for innocent children victims of aggression. And I want us to think about these grand points in time as not being a thing that happened in the past or happened elsewhere, because they happened today, and the architects of these struggles had not always been recognized in their communities and at their times. And many of you are exactly that person who somebody uncomfortable in a blazer in 100 years will be talking about because of your role in the trade union struggle, because of your presence in your community, and because of the work that you do. So I want to take an opportunity to recognize all of you, and if you would give yourselves a round of applause, we'll go on next to introduce these amazing people, and you can clap again, but let's warm up with you. Is it mortifying when you give someone a biography and then they read it out loud? Yes. Mine is quite mortifying, but I'm going to go through the exercise so that we know who's here before us, although I may truncate. This is Carmen, everyone, Carmen. Carmen Watson is a communications advisor for the BC Treaty Commission. Carmen's a mixed-race settler of primarily Chinese and European descent with Francophone roots. She resides on the territories of the Musqueam, the Tsleil-Waututh, and the Squamish nations. Carmen believes in reciprocal relationship building with communities, including her own, the need for intersectional storytelling across mediums, and centering the voices of those who have been and are disempowered. She's committed to actively learning and unlearning the histories of the people, places, and institutions around us. Carmen uses she, her, and elle. Let's have a hand for Carmen, please. It is an honor to share the stage with all of you. Next, our next famous person is Danny Ramadan. Danny's award-winning Syrian-Canadian author and an advocate for queer refugees. His short stories and essays have appeared in publications across North America and Europe, and his fundraising efforts have helped raise over $200,000 for Syrian 2S LGBT-identifying refugees. A graduate of UBC, he's currently the writer-in-residence at the Hague Brown House in Campbell River, and he has 2 forthcoming books, which you can add to your online cart, because I know you all have one. The first, they're both to be released by Penguin Random House, a novel entitled Foghorn Echoes, published in 2022, and his memoir, Crooked Teeth, forthcoming and to be released in 2024. Danny uses he, him. He, him. A round of applause for Danny, please. Next, I want to introduce to you Joulene Parent. Her maternal line comes from Indigenous Treaty 10 Dene Nation of Northern Saskatchewan, and her paternal line comes from a father who was a working immigrant from Canton, China. Most of Joulene's childhood was spent in the downtown east side of Vancouver, my neighborhood, on the unceded Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish territories. She's an active union member of the International Longshore and Warehouse Workers Union. Joulene has served in an elected executive position for the last 6 years with Local 500 here in Vancouver, and for the past 5 years with the ILWU Canada Board. She's currently a facilitator for the More Than a Bystander project, and is also a workplace harassment and violence prevention instructor to more than 2,700 longshore workers. Her past positions include Vancouver and District Labour Council as a delegate and co-chair of the Women's Committee, in addition to being a past Indigenous rep for the British Columbia Federation of Labour. Everyone, Joulene. And certainly not last is my friend Dan Coulter, who is the BC NDP MLA for Chilliwack and the Parliamentary Secretary for Accessibility. He's a first-term MLA, having first been elected in 2020, although no one doubts this will not be his last term. Prior to becoming an elected MLA, Dan was the president of the Canadian Union of Public Employees, Local 3787. As a millwright, Dan suffered a severe workplace accident in 1999, and he's been a strong advocate ever since for people to have a right to safe working conditions. He was a trustee on the Chilliwack Board of Education from 2013 to 2020. Everyone, Dan Coulter. Now, as is typical for a panel like this, I'm sure you've all seen one. I'm going to ask some questions of these panelists, and they've seen some of these questions in advance, and they've prepared their answers, maybe no. But I also want to give you an opportunity to ask questions of some of these superstars who have come. Carmen et moi peut répondre à vos questions en français.
So Carmen can answer your questions in French, but we can all answer in English.
Please don't be shy. You can present yourself at a microphone, and I will recognize you as we go along if you're very excited. We'll do a round of questions, and then I'll see if there's anybody keen. But I do want to hear from you, and I'd like to give you the opportunity to have some more floor time at your convention to speak to these folks. So do plan what you'd like to ask and who you'd like to ask it of. But I think I've been talking enough, and I want to hear from you. Carmen, I read your biography. Can you give us a punchline, a tweet about what you do and why it matters?
Donc, ce que j'ai décidé, j'allais
So I decided I'd answer in English and French.
make it a little bit easier so you don't have to always put your headphones on. So I also work as a bilingual equity and inclusion strategist for a company called Backout Consulting. Je travaille aussi comme une consultante bilingue pour une compagnie qui s'appelle Backout Consulting. Je suis une stratégiste techniquement en équité en bilingue. Mais je dirais que mon...
So with respect to my short punchline, it would be something like, who here remembers Trudeau Sr.?
The line where he says, just watch me, like you can't do this, just watch me. Donc, en français, c'est watch me.
Watch me is what he would say.
A long line of people who, like, they were told you can't do this, it's never been done this way. Donc, je viens d'une famille.
So I come from a family where my ancestors heard many times, you can't do that here. But I was privileged. I had people in my ancestors who said, really? Watch me.
Who said, well, too bad I'm going to do it this way. And because of them, I'm here. C'est à cause d'eux que je suis capable.
Thanks to them, I'm here, and that I was able to live incredibly moments.
Able to live some extraordinary moments in my life. So, you know, just watch me.
There is a variant on that, has a very catchy dance bass that I hope that we will have the opportunity to to hear a little bit later. Danny, what's your tweet? What's your punchline?
Oh, you want me to follow that? That's really cool. Thank you. I feel great about this.
Oh,
Thank
it's
you,
not
Adrienne.
a competition. We're
Thank
all
you.
going to get
No,
there.
not at all. Okay, let me take you through this for a second. We think about our gender identity and sexual orientation in the following ways: our biological sex, what we're born as; our gender identity, who we think we are; our sexual orientation, who we're attracted to; and then our sexual practices, what we actually participate in, who we are in that sense. And I think my tweet would be talking about my sexual citizenship. Ooh. Being the person that I am is affected by the society around me. And in turn, being the person that I am based on those 4 elements affects the society around me. And I'm driven by that power that I give myself and that the society is forcing upon me sometimes. I'm driven by the idea that my identities, be it my sexual orientation, my gender identity, but also my racial identity, my immigration status, all of that has the same kind of power that creates the citizenship that represents my place in a society. And in a way, I think of myself as the person who is gaining that power and then using it back to affect positively the society around me. A lot of times when we are identifying within those marginalized identities, we think that the society is pushing us in a certain way. We don't realize that we are the superheroes that are gaining that power, that can push back and change the world that way. So I think when I think of myself, of everything that I do, I think of my citizenship in this society and how I can be an active citizen rather than take a step back and be pushed back. I feel like I did a really good job. I feel like I followed suit, didn't you? Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it. I'm very proud of myself.
Well, you're both fired because you're well over your character limits. Joulene, do you have an elevator pitch or a tweet to describe who you are, why you do this?
An elevator pitch or a tweet. I don't even know what an elevator pitch is, but a tweet, for those who don't know or didn't catch it, I'm with the Longshore Union, so ILW, and one of the mottos we borrowed / stole is actually from the Industrial Workers of the World: an injury to one is an injury to all. So steal it, use it, borrow it. But when I think of that, it's about kind of the subject matter that we're talking about, inclusion, equity. And Joey Hartman mentioned this once not long ago, is like sometimes if we're taking up space, we need to step aside or step back and let others or pull other people along. Like who else can I create space for? Who's not here? Who needs to be here? Whose voices needs to be amplified? And so when it is about an injury to one is an injury to all, it's not just when it suits me or it's when it's a good photo op. It's also when it's uncomfortable. Reconciliation and these other things to have inclusion is uncomfortable. And I think realizing that sometimes we get to live in comfort for too long. And, it says in some arenas, my higher power is more interested in my character than my comfort. So, take what you want and really realize and elevate where you can. So it would be an injury to one is an injury to all.
Dan, I know you're shy and not used to public speaking. As an elected official at all, I wonder if you'd like to give us your tweet or your elevator pitch.
I'm not so shy in public speaking, but I'm sort of shy being on this panel. I never thought of myself as an activist or anything like that. Definitely didn't think I was one 10 years ago or ever would be one. I think I have a strong sense of justice. Even someone cutting a line really gets on my nerves. And I think if you have a strong sense of justice, you have to include everyone. And diversity and inclusion and access is really, really important. And so, I lift my hands to the people here on this panel much more impressive when it comes to activism than I am. In many ways, I sort of failed up. I never thought in, cringe. I never thought in 2013 that I'd be, battling anti-trans hate at a school board table. School boards generally are very, very boring. And that's how I thought I'd live out my career on the school board. So I was just kind of fell into it that way, where I had to, where I have a strong sense of justice, I just have to stick up for what's right.
Excellent tweets, friends. I haven't told them they were going to have to give a tweet. I thought that was very good off the cuff. J'ai commencé avec...
So I started with historical dates to illustrate that we were part of a group. And Carmen, I would like to ask you to tell us a story which shows us how you're part of a team. And when did you know your team was winning? Well, that's an interesting question. I played left wing in hockey, but it was something that I started to do late in life.
Than most other players. I started when I was like 11 or 12. J'avais comme 11 ou 12 ans.
So I was 11 or 12, and my father registered my father
to play hockey. And then my dad turned to me and he said, "Do you want to play hockey?" Il a dit comme, "Veux-tu jouer?"
So he asked if I wanted to play too, and I said, well, I don't know, perhaps.
Puis il a dit, "Ben, pense-y, think about it."
I said,
I thought about it for a few seconds, and I was like, yeah, I want to play. So here I am, 12 years old, 11, I can't remember, never having done something. And I wouldn't say I'm a perfectionist, but I'm someone who gets aggravated when I don't do things really well.
So I'm not necessarily a perfectionist, but I'm someone who likes to do things well. So it was the very first time in my life that I didn't have the capacity to do something naturally.
When I started playing hockey, I didn't know how to stop, and my dad was like, "Good thing there are boards, you're eventually going to stop." Mais c'était super intéressant.
So it was very, very interesting. First time in my life where I wasn't naturally good at something, but the idea wasn't to win.
That wasn't the idea. The idea was, I'm going to get out there, I'm going to try something I'm not good at, and I ended up having met some of the most amazing people that I've ever had the privilege of working with. And it was this idea of it was house league, c'était pas compétitif, on perdait constamment.
It was house league. We were losing.
The idea was, we're not good at this, but we're going to make it worthwhile. C'était vraiment comme, on va faire quelque chose ensemble.
So we were going to do something together that we were not capable of doing individually.
Individually, we had to come together in order to make it happen. And I think that was one of the best lessons of my life. C'était une des meilleures leçons de ma vie.
The best lesson of my life. So you're going to lose from time to time, but the idea is that you're going to work together and you're really going to do whatever you can. You're going to have good times, bad times. You're going to cry.
Times, you're going to cry at times. You'll be sweating. Blood, sweat, and tears is not a pun in hockey, I can tell you that. But it was one of the best learning experiences of my life.
I was Googling last night as my household was asleep, but the city was still loud around me, and I was thinking about this contrast between the COVID isolation that made us sort of at the same time stuck at home, but also forced to interact, often for our survival. And Danny, I was hoping that you could tell us about a time when you felt like the isolation of your individualness wasn't the loudest thing, when you were a member of a team and you were in a place where you felt like you were winning. And because Carmen has given us a literal sports example, I'm going to ask you for something broader, to tell us about who your comrades are and what that feels like when you succeed, if only a little bit.
So I was born in Damascus. You would know that, but you wouldn't know that. So I was born in Damascus, and I grew up there as a queer kid, and I think my father could tell that I'm queer since a very early age because they can just tell. And he did everything he can in his power to kick the queerness out of me. Like, for example, sports-wise, he forced me to join a boxing team at the age of 11 because he thought that that would man me up, which is really interesting. I came out to my father when I was 17, and then I left my family's home and never to come back. Traveled the world and came back to Syria in 2010. Now, we all know what happened in Syria in 2010, 2011, I assume. What started as a revolution that I wanted to be there for, that would change the situation in Syria, move us away from dictatorship into democracy, slowly but surely over a year time turned into a civil war. And during that time, I didn't know what is my role in the changing times of my country. I didn't know what I can do to participate in this in a way that is meaningful to me and to who I am and to my identity. And that's when I met one of my best friends. Her name is something that is not Mariam, but we're going to call her Mariam for today. And you would know that Mariam is a lesbian the minute that you meet her. I think it's between the complete contrast between who she is as a person and what is expected of a Syrian woman to be. You see what I mean? And it took me a long time to actually come out to Mariam, because also in Syria, the laws, the society rejects you for your queerness. So if I didn't know that she's a safe person, I wouldn't come out. And I invited Mariam over to my house after we came out, which was a lot of, was breaking a lot of barriers, say, in my gender segregated country, basically. And then that evening, she invited a couple of her lesbian friends, and I invited a couple of my gay friends. And then we're suddenly 20 people in the house, and two communities that never interacted with one another, the gay community and the lesbian community. And somebody was like, oh, I have this trans person, can I invite them? And I'm like, yeah, sure, please. So it ended up being this like big, beautiful gathering. And the most beautiful thing about a community is that a community knows exactly what they need. So we as a community gathered there just for fun, but slowly but surely learned that this place is safe and that we need sharing circles. And people suggested, let's start sharing circles. And every Thursday, we'll just gather and we'll talk about our lives, who we are. In a way, this group therapy with no therapist inside. I was asked to download illegal queer movies for folks to watch. So I downloaded The Birdcage, I downloaded In and Out, I downloaded The Vagina Monologues, I downloaded all of those movies, and I would screen them on an empty wall, and people would sit down, cuddle together, and watch those things. And it sounds like I created an underground LGBTQ center. If you ask me right now, I have created an underground LGBTQ center, but at the time, I was just having fun with my friends. It's not like I had a 5-year strategic plan. I didn't have funding from some weird entity out there. You folks didn't bring me money. Seriously. Seriously, folks. I had to pay rent from my own pocket. Seriously, what the hell? Yeah. Of course, it didn't last. Beautiful things never last. I was arrested for it, and that's how I ended up being a refugee. But then that same community slowly but surely moved to Lebanon. And then when I came to Canada, the reason why I sponsor people, the reason why I raise money, and by the way, it's $300,000 now. Ooh. Thank you. Is because I want to bring these folks over here. Over the last 6-7 years since I started sponsoring folks to come to Canada, raise funds for them. So Rainbow Refugee Society, which you all should pull your phones right now and donate to, please and thank you, are the ones who basically build the sponsorship. I just raise the money for them. And for every person that I sponsor, I tattoo them on my shoulder. There's a bird for every person that I sponsor. I need to put this on again. Sorry, I know that was a beautiful moment and I'm ruining it. Gosh.
I think anything you do with that blazer is going to be perfect.
I mean, I know, right? I mean, come on. Have you seen this? Gosh. It's just, it's meaningful that the community knew what they needed. It's meaningful that ecosystem was born by itself. And that ecosystem didn't need the guidance of somebody who comes in from a charity perspective or from a hierarchy perspective. It just built what it needed to build. And that's the beauty of it. That's the beauty of marginalized folks coming together, sitting together in the same room, being like, this is what we need, and this is how we can make it happen.
Thank you. Joulene, Danny raised a point just now that the community knows what it needs. And I think the way that this has been framed in kind of the discussion around the pandemic and how we are surviving has been labeled as mutual aid, but of course we recognize this principle as solidarity. And I wonder if you could tell us about a time in your life when you were on a team and you were winning. I, of course, want to ask you about this in a trade union context, but I don't want to put a box around what you want to say about community survival and working together and how we sometimes win. Just that little question.
Let me just see if I get this right. Community survival, a time of solidarity, and how we win in a personal context or work context?
Yeah, give us a solidarity example.
Solidarity. Well, speaking of timelines, one of the very valuable dates in ILW Canada's history is actually June 18th, which is coming up, and it's called the Battle of Valentine, Pier. So that was in 1935, but timelines, and the year before, 1934, was when there was a huge coastwise strike with ILW, all of the coastwise contracts, longshore contracts, from the south of the border of Canada all the way down to Mexico. And it was a big deal back then because people, back then, Harry Bridges, who was a huge advocate for human rights ahead of the days, think 1930s, right? And they were fighting for decent hours of work, decent pay, and a hiring hall, which was a big deal. So a couple people died that day, specifically Nicholas Bourdois and Howard Sperry, and many, many, many others were injured, and they ended up winning, but because they stood in solidarity, in silence, going down the coast with these white caps, and basically in silence acknowledging the people who died and this big gang up from the shipping industry on workers, on civilians. And the shipping federations are obviously connected, and they did not want something like that to happen up here. So back then, you know, if you look in the newspapers, it's called Powell Street riots or something else. It's not called what it's called, and just even the power of naming, right? What actually is versus what was. And when that happened here, unfortunately, the dockers here did not win that. It was the first time tear gas was used on civilians in Canada against longshore workers, and we're talking, you know, the women's auxiliary who like, they're all dressed in their finest, just trying to approach other workers saying, you know, please don't cross picket lines. And so this narrative, when it's about solidarity and talking about it and getting people involved and commemorating it, and how to continue to do that fight, because it took many years before ILW Canada actually became formed, but the struggles we have to stay here, to be here, and having that solidarity. So, I mean, the beautiful thing about social media now is, you know, you can use hashtags And I try and explain it to people who don't understand the internet. It's like a super highway, where if you use that hashtag, you get on the super highway and you're like checking out these other people that are on the super highway with you, and you get to see that what that causes and get on board, right? So I think it's about continuing to see, what struggles are there and how to be a support and what it is that people need, what it is that workers need. And I don't know about other industries, but one of the things that the ILW does is really get and reach out and continue to work with pensioners, retired longshore, but also amplify the voices of young workers to kind of bridge that gap, which holistically in many, many cultures, but I'm just going to speak of my own Native and Chinese cultures, it's a norm to have that grouping of people together to work in community. So that's one of the things of bringing, that wholeness back where it was sort of broken. So I think I kind of digress there, but that paints a picture. Yeah.
I think the Valentine Pier massacre, the Battle of Valentine Pier, is such an important labor example, not just because it happened in Vancouver, not just because everybody on the waterfront worked there, but because of the twinning between business and army, that this was the first time civilians were tear gassed, and they tear gassed the medical tent where the workers, where the women were patching up folks who had been attacked by agents of the employer and agents of government. It's shameful, and it is a feature of the way working class people are put down when we try to organize around the world. And I think your button and remembering that these things happened, it's a useful thing to just have on your Post-it note on your workstation to remember it's not alone.
And it triggered my memory too, because as I was searching this narrative, I'm going to give a plug here for the Dockers podcast, because one of our pensioners, Mike Eisinger, talked about 3 very powerful books, and one was A Big Strike, one was Never Say Die, and another one is a Citizen Dockers. And in, I forget which 2 books, it actually talks how the city of Vancouver at the time put $50,000 into it to have special police. So there was special police, the police at the time, and RCMP against civilians, right? So it's like, okay, it was beyond shipping industry. It was like these systems that were in place. And if you search the photos now, it's probably more common, but you will see these special police outside and at the Vancouver Art Gallery, which was the courthouse, right? So one of our day of mourning events that we went to was actually on those steps, and kind of, again, remembering the narrative of buildings that are still here that are made into art now, but these systems that were in place to displace workers and basically blacklist, because what happened back then, there were a bunch of company unions at the time, and I think we know what that's about, that if you didn't fit that profile, you were not allowed to work on the waterfront. So if you were militant, if you were active, there's books and systems in there that actually talked about these shipping groups would only hire you if you were a white married man, and it says that in there. So if you were white and not married, forget about it, or any other racialized worker, forget about it. But those of you who are visiting here, I'm sure you've walked along the harbor and the waterfront. That spot that interjects right between Convention Center and Canada Place, you will see all these labor plaques that were brought forward by labor and the BC Labor Heritage, but one of them is very specifically the bows and arrows, which I try and amplify wherever I am, and the bows and arrows were the first Indigenous and very racialized group of longshore workers, and they were the first union on the waterfront. And so how did that, if you look at that picture of the statistics and the people that were there that were working these very hard, precarious jobs, like I'm telling you, in 1900s, the First Nations were doing the most dangerous work, were the most dispensable, And some of these logs, you imagine how big the logs would be in Canada. When it went to London, they couldn't offload them. So they sent these vessels back to get the Indigenous workers to go there and offload them. So it's like, you're utilized when you're utilized, but, as soon as other people need jobs, it's like, sorry, you're not allowed to work anymore. So again, looking at restoring systems, seeing where they've been in favor of some and not in favor of others, and making those changes.
Your mention of blacklisting makes me think fondly of the Amazon warehouse workers who were fired for making a union, who just got a union. I'm very proud of those folks. And they're like, hey, thanks, boss, for going to space. While you were there, we made a union. Dan, I want to ask you so many questions about government, because the British Columbia government has given us some finely paid sick days for workers even without a union, and it has been easier this week for workers to join a union. Which is something that I know many of us have been asking government for since 2001, when a right-wing government came to power here. I don't want to make you talk all about the government, but I do want you to tell us a time when you felt like you were on a team and you were winning, and it was more than just your voice screaming in the wilderness.
I guess obviously the day I was elected, but I've been an NDP, BC NDP activist for quite a long time. By the way, I used to follow around the Labor Minister going, card check, just waiting for him to institute it, and I was so happy when it was, and I hope unions are out there organizing right now, because although I hope we stay in government forever, it's very unlikely. That hasn't happened, and you can be rest assured if you don't organize now, that piece of legislation is not long-lived. So get your organizing done now. I guess I really feel part of a team because of its diversity. It's amazing diversity. If you're in the legislature and you look down from the gallery, you'll see like a crew of older white men with, there's about 5 women, I think, but mostly older white men. And then you'll see a very diverse, colorful group, the BC NDP, and it's amazing. And one of the things is policy really matters, right? And the BC NDP has an equity mandate. I know you know about that, Adrienne. I don't know about it. Everyone else knows that. But when a BC NDP MLA leaves their post, retires, or however leaves their post, a member of an equity-seeking group must be the next candidate. And it's really made a difference. We have over 50% women in our caucus. We have a lot of people of color. We have a lot of people from the LGBTQ2+ movement. We have, it's amazing. And then we have people who, are workers, like myself. You have lawyers, not a lot of business people, but that's fine. And the other crew makes up for the business people, really represent. But so I think I feel even more part of a team because of the diversity of our team. And it's amazing in our caucus room. And I've also really always felt part of a team when I first got involved with the NDP, going to conventions and those sort of things, because there's such a connection with the labor movement. I was always jealous of the folks that were both in the BC NDP and in the labor movement. The warmth with which we talk to each other, just the embrace, calling each other friend all the time is just wonderful, and so that makes me feel part of a team as well.
Thank you. I think Dan is a very good example of a feeling that is somehow among our members that political action is part of a report that you listen to, but then you move on. And I think political action for working people is so fundamentally important, and electing people like Dan, and like Dan has described, to run our government for us should be foremost. So thank you for going there for us. It cannot be easy, and we appreciate it. I'd like to take an opportunity to invite delegates to come and ask us any questions if you should have one. It's all right, although, if you're shy. I'm going to do another round of questions, but I'd like to invite folks, if you have a question for the panel. Are you coming to ask a question, brave delegate? Oh, applause for our brave delegate. No. Brave delegate. I recognize the delegate on microphone 2. Please go ahead. Oh, is the floor, are folks, it's the microphone 1? Oh, okay, and let's have a hand for all the folks making this convention happen, because audio and video are doing a great job. Please go ahead, delegate.
So my question isn't really for anyone in particular. It's for anyone who kind of wants to answer it, but I think as people in equity-seeking groups, sometimes we don't necessarily feel a part or enough of those groups. So I was just wondering if any of you could speak to your experiences about where you didn't feel like enough within your own community and kind of how you combated that and continue to move forward.
Thank you, delegate. Let's start with Dan.
Yeah, so I acquired a spinal cord injury at work, and I've up until now, I've been a very poor self-advocate. I excluded myself from a lot of things by not sticking up for myself, and I didn't really understand. To me, I didn't really understand accessibility necessarily. And in my new work, I can see how important it is for people to fully participate in their communities, and how important it is to, identify, remove, and prevent barriers to people participating in their communities. And I've always been a self-advocate. If there was a ramp where I couldn't access something, I just turned around and went home and never mentioned it. I was very proud of myself the other day. There was an industry group that was, taking all of us MLAs to a different location so that we could look at their gadgets. And they sent a bus, and it wasn't accessible. And I was just wheeling back to the hotel. In all honesty, I didn't want to go to this thing anyway. But I was wheeling back to the hotel, and the lobbyist comes up to me, "Are you coming, Dan?" No. And I just said, "Is the bus accessible?" He said, "No." And I said, "You don't want me there." And I just wheeled away. And I was so proud of myself when I got back to my room that I bought myself a steak. But yeah, I never really felt part of I guess, my group, my equity-seeking group.
That's a really great, powerful question. I would say my whole life, being a visible minority in the downtown east side, and I always felt like, I tell this story when I do the harassment and violent prevention instructing in my course with the Be More Than a Bystander. When have you been bullied? It's like my whole life. Downtown east side, we'd have to cross Raycam to get home, and I get beat up for not being Native, and I'm like, but I am, right? And that actually segued me to get into boxing and kickboxing, because I actually liked the violent sport to protect myself. But I would say my whole life, until I eventually kind of went through some work and kind of embraced it, because I was like, why do I gotta be this? And at one point I actually lived in Viking, Alberta, if anyone knows where that is. Okay. We home of the Sutters. It's something I remember growing up, but I didn't know who the Sutters were. And I remember at one point I needed to get some dental work, and my dad, who's Chinese, he's like, "Oh, that's too expensive." And I'm like, "But we're First Nations, we don't pay for this." He's like, "I don't want people knowing you're Native." So I had it everywhere. And then when it came to even working on the waterfront, like I was a youth worker for street kids in the downtown east side before I worked on the waterfront. And when it came time for people tapping me on the shoulder to run for the executive, and if anybody knows anything about the waterfront, definitely the more old school you are, like these people are hardcore workers, but they don't look like me, right? Let alone being female. But there were a lot of groundbreaking people ahead of me who prepared the ground for equity and people to come in. And it was people who kept tapping me on the shoulder to say, you should run, you should run, you should run. And so I always had this imposter syndrome wherever I went. Like, even coming to this panel, honestly, I started looking at people's bio and I'm like, why did I get picked? So, you know, I still definitely struggle with that, but at the end of the day, you know, Rob Ashe and a few other people are always like, talk about what you know, right? I would not have the lifestyle I have today without a lot of key players in my life. And one of the stories, and I tell the story at a lot of events that I speak at, is once I was flying down to Kansas City to meet a partner of mine. We're not together anymore, but I remember I was flown down first class. I've never flown first class anywhere, right? So I'm like, ooh, first class, this is kind of cool. And then I hear the flight attendant get on the mic and say, you know, is there anybody else who wants to come up first class? Let us know and we'll upgrade you. And this stunning, tall woman of color came and she sat next to me. And I immediately felt little and kind of tiny and not seen. And I'm like, wait a second, what is that? Like, you're a female too. Just talk to her, say hi, like get interested in them, find out about them. And so she's flipping through this magazine and she's like, oh my gosh. And this was like 20 years ago, right? I'm 46 now. It's quite a few years ago, maybe 15 years, 20 years ago. She's like, I worked on this. And she had done something in NASA. And she's like, I can't believe I'm flying up in the air, reading this, watching this now. And I'm like, how did you get to be where you are? Like, did you just have good friends, good family, good support around you? And she's like, honey, it's all basic math. You know, there are always those who are trying to take from you, take your time, take your resources, divide you from your friends, divide you from your support. And then there are those that add. They're adding experiences, they're introducing you to people that introduce you to other people and have that sense of community. And I just choose to include the adders and multipliers and get rid of the subtractors and dividers. Yeah. Yeah. That story is, you know, to this person who shared that with me. And another story I will share is my now president of the International Union, Willie Adams. He's a profound man, and he's also a worker of color for the union, which is big, again, in our background where we come from. But I remember I would get kind of a little frustrated in the struggle because I'm always out there trying to get people involved, this and that. And I'm like, how do you get more involvement? How do you get that? Like, don't you get frustrated? And he's like, Joulene, I would rather have 10 people who are committed and they're in there, they're in the game, they're for the cause, than 100 people who don't give up. You know, you fill in the blank, right? And I kind of had this aha moment because I'm like, okay, you know, so then I can look at our union, our colleagues, our support, and be like, who are my allies? Who are the people that are interested, and they just need to be given the chance or the opportunity and elevate that. So, you know, it's holding on to adders and multipliers and reminding myself of that narrative to be like, no, I do belong here. Yeah.
Thank you. Danny or Carmen, do you want to talk about a time when you felt like you didn't belong or you weren't enough?
I honestly, to be honest, I'm perfect in every way. I never felt that way, honestly.
That's why I made it optional for you.
Have you met? No. I actually want to talk about this quite quickly. I'll just answer your question quite quickly. I am a brown person with an immigration experience, refugee experience, living with post-traumatic stress disorder, who's also an artist. So I live with an imposter syndrome. I am the imposter, and this is the syndrome. How I deal with it, to be honest, is that I overcompensate with a very healthy dose of ego. I play up the ego. I sit here and I'm like proud. I say those kind of jokes that are kind of soothing to myself, being like, yeah, you're doing great. This is a great way to answer this question. Your blazer is amazing. I talk positively to myself all the fucking time because If I didn't, yeah, I'm sorry, I'm not as polite as you are.
Long-term material here.
Truthfully, it's my way of hiding how insecure I am about who I am and how I'm doing. So I'm a Syrian author, right? I'm a Syrian writer, and just for that healthy dose of ego, I'm quite successful. I'm well published. My books are translated to multiple languages. I don't need to do any other thing than write beautiful books, and then people buy them, and then I buy houses and travel to Mexico. So but the thing that happens is, it's not that I think that I'm enough, it's the society around me thinks that that's enough for Syrians. There's not a single other Syrian writer out there in North America and Europe. Not a single one. I'm literally the only one globally. And that's not because I am that amazing. It's not because I wrote the manual on how to tell Syrian stories. Not by far. It's by the fact that a queer Syrian author is now already successful, the table's full, all the other queer Syrian authors don't deserve a spot. So it's not me who decides if I'm enough or not. I always think that I'm not enough. This ego is how I answer that. It's the table is never open enough for anybody else to join me. And God knows, I wish there's more people who are writing those stories, who are telling, or even writing comics and writing books about Iron Man. I don't care if you're a Syrian queer person who wants to write Iron Man stories. What I care is that you have the same opportunities that I have, but the world is refusing to give that space for us. Thank you.
Breakup, it's not you, it's me. Like, it's okay, all right. We've all been 17, it's okay. Donc, notre première rupture.
So the first time when someone breaks up, they say, it's not you, it's me.
Flip that line when I think about not fitting in. The systems that I live in were literally not built for people like me. Les systèmes.
So the systems in which we live were not created for people like me.
To, some of it was interesting, and Joulene talk about this, but some of the unions in the city. Has anyone here heard of the 1907 race riot in Vancouver? So unions played a big part in orchestrating that. So for those of us who aren't familiar, unions at the time felt that certain workers, i.e. white workers, were losing jobs to specific folks. So it was a lot of Chinese and Japanese folks who were being blamed for job losses. They orchestrated a riot that went through Chinatown, Koreatown, and destroyed, set buildings on fire, and it lasted 3 days. The police didn't come, of course, and nothing was done. And I think, when we think about that, when we feel like we're an outsider, when we feel like we're the reason something doesn't feel right, we have to remind ourselves that's not true. The world that you're operating in, for most of us, was not actually built for us, by us, all these things. It was meant for a very specific kind of individual. And that anxiety that comes up, what I have to tell myself, it's not me, it's you. It's not me that doesn't fit in here, it's you, the collective you, who have built a system in which I am not welcome. And I will do my damnedest to make sure that my kids, my brother's kids, whoever down the line, does not feel that feeling the same intensity. Donc, essentiellement en français.
So in French, it's when I feel that I don't fit in somewhere or I'm not really welcome. The idea isn't that I'm not the problem. The system isn't ready to accept me. That's it. And I'm going to do my very, very best as a human being, as a woman of color, to be sure that in 5 years from now and 20 years from now, if someone like me doesn't feel they fit in, and that people who don't look like me have, or even, but are of a minority group, will not have as many barriers in front of them.
Merci beaucoup. Personne m'a demandé.
Nobody asked my opinion, but it's the same for me. I'm a lawyer, non-binary lawyer. It's strange. And I was invited to a Transgender Day of Remembrance. It was a sad day, at Simon Fraser University. I was the invited guest. And there were students there who were maybe 19 years of age. And they said it's the first time, or one of them said, it's the first time that I've seen a non-binary person who is maybe not successful, but is all right. And it shows an example. And this is something that makes it possible for me to continue in a profession that isn't really made for us, as it were.
I see two delegates on the microphone, and I'm being a terrible chair because I did not see which one of you was first. Was it this delegate here? I don't know the microphone number that you're on, but the sound people do.
Yes,
microphone. I recognize the delegate on microphone 4. Please go ahead.
Thank you and welcome. My question is for Danny. If I may ask this question, how is your relationship with your father and your family now? As what you said in your Twitter there, it really touched me that you had to leave at 17.
All right. When I got in a panel, I promised myself I'll always be honest. It's shite. It's the worst relationship ever. Am I allowed to swear here? Is that okay? Is that something I can? Yeah? All right. Fuck yeah. Awesome. Great. Yes.
Danny, they told you it's a union event, right?
Yeah. I guess, yeah. I should have figured. Yes, thank you. Yeah. My family rejected me when I was 17. My father kicked me out, and I lived in between houses, on the streets, lived with my friends, in my grandmother's house, until I found my own permanent ways of living. And there are two things. My mother passed away because of COVID last year. And thank you, I appreciate it. I never had the chance, in the back of my mind, I was always like, one day I'm just going to sit down with this woman who rejected me based on a conversation, basically, and just have that conversation and be able to have an equals conversation, and that would never happen. But after many sessions with my therapist, I think where I am is that I do not regret the boundaries I created with my mother. I just mourn the fact that they needed to exist. And that is sad, but it's part of life. I protected myself, I did the right thing for myself, and that's how life decided on. As for my father, it's really important to remember that in his story, from his perspective, from his narrative, I'm the villain. I'm the bad guy in that story, because his society in Syria, his religion in Islam, the laws in Syria, his family, the way he grew up, everyone is telling him that I'm the villain. And then I'm standing there being like, I'm not the villain. And who he will believe is the overwhelming power of the society around him. So I still think my father is an asshole, but at least I don't think he is intentionally an asshole. I think that there's a reason why. God. Every time that I say this, I imagine my father sitting there giving me a really dirty look. So that is the kind of mentality I'm in right now. One thing that is important to say, though, my sister and I, who the last time I saw, she was 11. We met on social media in 2018, and we started to get to know each other, and we started to build a relationship. And then in 2020, in February 2020, I applied to sponsor her to come to Canada. Of course, that took way longer. She arrived with her husband and her child in October last year, and my birthday was on Tuesday. Thank you. And my birthday is on Tuesday, and she's coming tomorrow to decorate my house in secret. I don't know that. So they can celebrate my birthday. So I'm. At the end of the day, good people come together. Yes. Thank you for the question.
No. No. Happy early birthday.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
So thanks everyone for speaking today. I think some folks touched on things like the isolating effects of COVID-19, and just generally there's this trend where our time and energy has just increasing constraints put on us by our workplaces, the kind of like attempt to eliminate like work-life balance by all our employers. I work in healthcare, and that's certainly present there. So I guess my question is, when I find myself looking at my other colleagues and members and trying to figure out ways to get them involved, to build capacity and coalition, some of the big challenges we're having now is that everyone's feeling burnt out and exhausted at this particular moment in time, which probably isn't unique, but I guess this is a question open to anyone. If there's any strategies that you found that in your time organizing has helped you build that coalition, bring people in, and maybe even what it looks like to try and bring people in when they are also, at their max, which, tough question, but.
Easy question about burnout in the time of creeping authoritarianism and how to build a team?
Just that?
Just that.
Yeah, I would love to answer.
I mean, I've never run a team, so take it with a grain of salt. But so Audre Lorde, rest as resistance. I think we live in a culture that emphasizes needing to get things done right away and like having a short-term perspective and assuming that short-term perspective translates to longevity and sustainability, and unfortunately it just doesn't. And I think sometimes we think the little things don't matter. We think like someone working on a poster with us in Canva isn't gonna matter. We think that someone having a spare 30 minutes to call 3 MLAs, right, and leave voicemails. Sorry, I hope you don't get them now. But things like that, like the little things do matter. And I think like, in the same way that it takes, I don't know how many bees to form a hive, it takes a ton of people with a ton of different skills and energy levels to come together and make these things happen. Donc, l'idée, je pense, c'est que
So often in our culture, you underline the short term. So we want to see instantaneous success, but it creates more harm, I would say, in the long term, because we think we have to do it now or we'll be penalized or sanctioned in a year or so. But no, truly, I believe that you have to focus on the idea of what can I do? Do I have 20 or 30 minutes to call someone, an MLA to change something? Can I help someone to distribute important things like leaflets?
There's all these little snippets of time that don't actually cause further harm, or there's all these snippets of labor that can be done that don't cause harm. And I think like from a very serious perspective, I'm someone who had to go on medical leave for burnout, right? And I'm a year out of it now. I took a month off. I'm a year out of it now, and I'm still feeling it. And I think like I am grateful for the people who showed me compassion and sat down and said, you don't need to do this. You don't need to be in this mindset of getting things done immediately. Because it's this constant messaging we're fed of like, if you don't do it now, like somebody else is gonna take your spot, it's gonna hurt, you're not gonna get the recognition you need. But we can reject that. Like we don't need to live with the constraints that have been placed on us without us even wanting to build those constraints, So. Thank you.
While my gets on. So if you see me going like this, it's because of the lights. And, I had a car accident back in 2020, so part of it was having a concussion and dealing with the lights and sounds and stuff like that. But I was doing a lot of things, not just for my local, district labor councils, this and that, multitude of things. And part of it was taking the time to step back and also asking for help and delegating, declining. For those who may not know, I'm here in this seat because somebody wasn't available, right? Like there will be other people to fill in. So when I ask people for help, if they're not available, even asking them if they know somebody else, and then finding meaning and reasons that it's important. So I'm part of my portfolio, thank you for turning those down. Part of my portfolio on my executive, the executive is I carry the education portfolio, right? And so it's asking other people, up and coming, hopefully executive members, that putting their names forward to run, to help, to be the support. And we have a multitude of dates that are important. I mentioned Valentine, Day of Mourning, certain things, and people have families, people have events, they can't be at everything. But sometimes speaking in a way that's important to them. For example, people that I know who have children, Day of Mourning, super, super important day. You have children. Do you realize young workers can get injured or on the higher scale of being injured or put in danger more than others? And sometimes we need to invite people along to come to these events and make space for. And for those of you who know Rob Ashton, our president of the ILW Canada, that's a big reason for why I'm here today, is somebody personally invited me to a picket to help support workers, right? I wouldn't have gone had I not been invited. So that kind of speaks on organizing too. And I think there are some people, if we really look around in our midst, they're having the FOMO. They're just waiting to be invited. Like when I saw some of the posts about COPE, and I'm like, oh, I wonder what's going on there. I can't wait to go check that out. And what did I miss? And I'm glad things are being uploaded because I can go back and get that. But sometimes it's the people who are in our midst that they're just waiting for the invite, right? Like I'm for those who don't know, I'm actually very shy and more introverted. I'm not like, I'll do it on the spot. My background is I drive cranes for a living, right? I love driving cranes. I'm in machines handling stuff. But sometimes it's out of my comfort zone, and people need to be invited. They need to be included. And you just might be the person that's, prepping the next person to run because you invited them.
Thank you. I think that's very important that you've been invited. I see the delegate, and I want to translate that into an action item for delegates who are here. I have much too much work, as I'm sure you do, and I was having a bad week last week, and I picked half of Friday to call back all the students who had called me to ask for help with their cases and their work. I don't have time to mentor students that I don't know, but I did it because it's an investment in the future, and there'll be a day when it won't be me doing the files, it will be them, and they will be training up new folks. So if you're feeling overloaded and you feel like there's too much, find someone and train them up and then give them half of your committee work, and then you can drive to the meeting together, and then one day you could actually retire and sit on a deck and listen to the birds and not type up the minutes as your hobby. I've read that this is possible. Patient delegate, thank you. What's your question?
I'm very proud to be part of a Canadian union that has so many members and delegates that fit into these equity caucuses. Many of us, though, are allies. And I guess my question for you today is, how do we be better allies? How do we take it beyond tokenism?
I was listening, I found a very vitriolic Instagram post yesterday that's what's talking about the queer alphabet and how neither of the A's in there are for allies, because real allyship doesn't need you don't get a cookie for it. It's just being a good person. And I think for my work, I'm guided by this nothing about us without us. And the people affected by the problem have to be the ones who drive, in the way that the bosses aren't going to solve any of our issues for us. We have to ask. And I suppose, the panel, you must have some intersectional anti-oppression examples, or a way to talk about how we need to pull the same sled even though when we're different. In my experience, it's dealing particularly with middle-class white feminists who are challenged by the existence of trans people, especially trans youth who are in our movement. And these are sisters often, and there's a group of folks who can be educated and learn, and there's a group of people who just hate us, and that discussion makes itself clear. But I think this fake politics of shortage and emergency, that equity is a pie, and that you have to hurry and get your piece and keep it for yourself. What do you say to that argument that you, like, if how you can't have any rights because there's only 5 rights?
They use that argument on my ancestors. They use that argument on almost all our ancestors here. They still use that argument. I say they as in, like, not individual people, but people and systems. And I think it's this idea of, like, if that is how you view the world, it's really hard for me to have a conversation with you about rights. Because if it's my right to being hired hurts you and your pension, I don't have time for that conversation. And I think, like, maybe that'll change in time, but I think the beauty of allyship is that you don't know what you don't know. And an ally to me is somebody who doesn't pretend that they know. Like, in the same way where, you know, if someone has chronic pain, like, I get really bad migraines to the point of, like, having, vertigo. And, like, I'll talk to people and they'll go, oh, when I'm hungover, I get really bad headaches too. And it's like, thanks so much, you know, a Gatorade should help you, right? But, like, my prescription meds need to help me, kind of thing. And I think, like, allyship, we might use that word when we mean other things, but to me, allyship is, it's like, what am I willing to, without taking the world on as this, like, zero-sum game pie image, what am I willing to give up in order to make sure that this is a level playing field? Does that mean I'm not going to sit on a board because someone else's voice is going to speak to a lot more lived experience than I am? Then that needs to be somebody else's role. And I think the question of tokenization is super important, but I also think, like, going back to this idea of being in a rush, like, a lot of stuff ends up looking performative and being tokenistic because we're like, Pride is coming up, we need to put out a poster for the gays. Like, it's like, yeah, like, I'm like, that doesn't make me feel good. That doesn't make me feel seen, right? Like, I would much prefer a company post something on the last day of June and says, like, we took our time and we were learning, versus it's June 1st, we're gonna put a, like, rainbow flag in the window, you know, you won't get a discount here and our staff really hate you, but come on in. Like, that doesn't make me feel good, you know? And I think the more time we take to learn, and then the flip side to learning is unlearning. Like, we need to be willing to put in the energy to unlearn everything we've been taught that is wrong when it comes to, like, I'm not straight, like, people who are like me, people who don't feel seen. Like, take the time, and I think the fact that you're all here is a sign that you're taking the time, and I think that's how these conversations end up changing. Donc, en français, je dirais...
In French, shortly, I would say the idea of allyship is to reject the idea of the rights. I have more rights and then you have less. Not at all. It's more an idea of what can I do when I have more privilege in a specific situation to make sure that people with a lived experience in a specific field can have the right to describe the history, to give the next steps or action items at a meeting.
Can I say something?
Yes, please say something.
Thank you. The delegate who asked the question, if you don't mind standing up, that would be lovely. Thank you. Hi. I'm going to make some assumptions here. You're an older white woman. Yes? Perfect.
Thumbs up.
Awesome. I have no idea what it means to be a woman. I have no idea, for me as a cisgender man, no idea what it means to be a woman who is older in a society like this. I am your ally by sitting back and listening to you, telling me what your experience is, and acknowledging that I'm completely ignorant, it's completely out of my ability to understand, and the only way I can help is by sitting down and hearing you telling me what ageism is like, what sexism is like. And privilege is fluid that way. Privilege, the fact that I am privileged as a male person, it changes when I walk, it amplifies when I walk into a room full of women. But also the fact that I'm a brown person, when I walk into a room full of white men, I fear for my life. So it changes as I move from context to context. Does that make sense? You may sit down now, you don't have to stand up. Same with you. Can I role play with you for a second, Adrienne?
Yeah.
No idea what it means to be a trans person. I've never experienced that. I've never experienced that.
Awesome.
It's not something that I have a personal knowledge of. And the only way for me to learn that is for me to acknowledge that I'm ignorant about it, and that you are then, by default, the source of knowledge about it. And when you tell me this is who I am, and this is what I need, that is enough. That is absolutely 100%. I don't need to even fucking Google. That's enough. You are the person who is the lead on your own identity, if that makes perfect sense.
It does.
Yeah.
I think what you're saying is that the core of alliance and solidarity is a kind of humility. When we admit what we don't know as the starting place, and we thank people for sharing their knowledge with us, knowing that that's not free, and we're not entitled to it. I like to think of the example of making sure when we are destroying glass ceilings that we're not also reinforcing glass floors, especially because of how they're invisible. And I want to thank you for that question, because it's particularly astute for us, especially in the middle of a colonial project in white supremacist society, in the shadow of creeping authoritarianism, when all of our rights are at risk.
And we would be joking with ourselves, we would be kidding ourselves if we say that this society doesn't have a hierarchy. There's a hierarchy in this society. It just changes a bit. And we're always, as people of color, as trans folks, we're always on the bottom half of that hierarchy, regardless of what we do. And it changes, it moves, depends on the context, but it's still there. And acknowledging that hierarchy is the first step towards breaking it down.
Exactly. Julian, briefly, because I know we have more questions.
One of the things, really quickly, uncover, discover, discard, right? We get to uncover, and I mean, some of the allyship, the work's already been done. 94 calls to actions, 231 recommendations, and so on and so on. It's just, it's already been there. It would be like us putting a motion and then laying dormant, right? What motions, what things are there that are dormant, that need you, that need your support, that need some action, that need some tweet, that need some donations, and to just do it, yeah.
Thank you. Delegate on microphone 3, please go ahead.
And this question is for Dan. Now, I've been disabled since I was 5 years old, so I never saw how society treats someone that's not disabled, and then in the middle of their life gets disabled. I'm curious to know what your reality is, how it's different from before you were disabled until now.
Thank you, Delegate. Dan.
So, I mean, this is also, I think, will help the delegate who asked the question before about allyship, right? You just cannot know until you're there, right? You can't know the lived experience of anyone else. And so I didn't know, and it was a huge change in my life. I was 24 years old. I was a blue-collar worker in a sawmill, and all my, activities outside of working were physical as well. And so it was a really real reckoning for me. I like when Adrienne was talking about nothing about us without us, because I'll maybe talk about our accessibility legislation, which is awesome. A lot of the time, I'm disabled and I have my own lived experience, but there's also a hierarchy of disability, and spinal cord injury is right near the top. And so, we've constituted a provincial accessibility committee, and in the legislation, we have to have at least half of the folks on that committee have to be folks with disabilities or serve in disability advocacy organizations. And I can proudly say that every single member on our committee is either disabled or serves the community. And a lot of what I do, because I'm up there on the hierarchy, and I just can't, I couldn't know what it was like to have a spinal cord injury to begin with. I can't know what it's like to have your disability. And so, you know, it's really important for me. I'm an elected official. I have a pile of privilege near the top of the disability hierarchy. And it's really important for me to step back and let other folks, you know, tell us about their lived experience so that we can, you know, identify and remove the barriers that they face every day. And so, yeah, that's why a lot of the time it's an immense responsibility that I have, you know, to get this right for everyone in British Columbia.
I'm going to recognize the delegate on microphone 3. I see the delegate on microphone 1 will be next. And if there is time, I want to ask all of you what gives you hope. But that might be part of what folks are going to ask. Go ahead, delegate on microphone 3.
Hi. I just want to say you're all wonderful. Thank you for being here and sharing your stories. I work in the education sector. I work in elementary school, and I'm a leadership coordinator. And what Carmen was saying that, oh, we rushed and we did a poster for, I missed what it was for Pride Week. So it really resonated with me because there are some things that we miss in our school, and one of them was Anti-Bullying Day. And then the day would pass, and I'd see pictures posted on Facebook with everyone wearing their pink shirts. And I'm like, I'm going to be darned about this, and I'm going to do it this year. My leaders are going to do it. And we joined the website, the workshop that they did across Canada with Dave, I can't remember his name, who started it, I'm sorry, but we did posters, and those posters are still up. And we talked about kindness. My leaders went in and they educated the younger kids. So it really resonated when you made that comment, because you're right. It shouldn't just be for that day or for that week. It should be all the time. So thank you.
I recognize the delegate on microphone 1.
Thank you. My name is Layla. I wanted to ask regarding how you go about breaking silences in your workplace, in your communities, whether it's like on your own behalf or for other people, regarding things like microaggressions, that kind of thing, how you approach that, or leading into hope, when has that happened? When have you broken silence and it's gone well? Thanks.
Dan.
It's not microaggressions, I guess. It's full-on aggression when I'm talking about, you know, the Chilliwack School Board. For those of you who don't know, because I know this is a Canada-wide election, it was Canada-wide news at the time. We had a trustee speak out against SOGI, which is sexual orientation and gender identity kind of curriculum, and all it basically is, you know, you tell a kid in grade 2 there's more than one kind of family. This is shocking. Yes, this is very shocking and scandalous. And so, you know, this was brought to the board, the school board level. We had rallies at the school board. We had folks coming up and saying anti-trans things at the public participation periods. And unfortunately, there was no trans people on our board. So with my sense of justice, it really got me angry. And so every time someone came up to the mic and started saying transphobic things, I would scream, "Point of order!" and try and shut them up and keep just screaming point of order until the chair would tell them to shut up. And so that's the time, you know, that's when I broke my silence. But I just get this, just have this sense of justice. I get enraged. Even, you know, we in the House at the legislature, you know, there's a period of time called statements, and we're only supposed to speak for 2 minutes, and I'm just watching the clock, and if someone goes 10 seconds over, it really makes me mad, because I like to follow the rules. But so anyway, yeah, I would just say you need to break the silence. If something's happening, you need to break the silence. You have to say something. If you don't say anything, you're complicit. And so I really think, you know, when you see injustice, you have to call it out.
some active participation, but because we're with the international union and it includes a Maritime Union of Australia and so on and so on. And one of the things we actually have on the back of the shirt is they don't like us, we don't care. So when I say they don't like us, we don't care. They don't like us, we don't care. On the count of 1, 2, 3. They don't like us, we don't care. They don't like us, we don't care. They don't like us, we don't care. Thanks.
Oh, wow. I'm breaking the silence. Look at this. I think that we ask marginalized folks for too much. I think, honest to God, we ask marginalized folks to be educators and break silences and represent, and specifically folks like us sitting on this panel, to represent all of our identities and be on the right side of every single issue politically and societally, and be ready to do all the things. And sometimes, you know what? I'm fine with the silence. I'm totally, absolutely fine with the silence. If the person that I am approaching, that I'm talking to, just wants to be silent and just hold on and just be themselves and be in their sorrow and be in their sadness and be just be. I honestly think that that's okay. I truthfully think that that's okay. I'm not a silent person. And I try my very best to speak on behalf of the folks that I represent. I try to speak that through my art. I try to speak that on panels. I try to speak that by painting my nails when I'm walking in the streets, just because it speaks to breaking a cultural norm. But if somebody wants to be silent, that's completely their right. And it's not my place to, if somebody is burned out, I think they should go for a hike, go to the woods, remove the burdens of humanity and become one with nature, if that's what they want, if that's what they need. That's where I stand with that.
I think the burden of having to carry a thing and being subjected to more oppression is something important to mark in the way that you've said, because sometimes it is compulsory that we speak up against things. There's a very important check on that, and that's safety and exhaustion and survival. And when it's not safe, we can't force people to be that. I think it's important also to recognize that sometimes we speak out not because we're interested in changing the world or broader social justice. I don't have my gender-neutral pronouns because it's like a political statement, or I want it to be easier for other people who use they, them, or EL, because I just want to not be offended every day, and it could be quite selfish in a way to change the world for everyone. Carmen, did you want to speak to this question, or do you want to hear from this next delegate?
I mean, I do. I would like to hear from the next delegate, but I kind of just hopping on this, like, je pense l'idée du silence.
I think,
and I think this is where that piece of privilege and safety is super important. Et je pense ici, c'est l'idée de comme notre sécurité.
of course, safety and privilege is important.
La fusillade à Atlanta.
I'm thinking of Atlanta. I remember, even before seeing the headlines, I knew that there were Asian women who were shot.
And like even before reading the headlines, knowing that it was going to be Asian women because of the way that they were talking about the location of what had happened or what was done. And like I did not have the energy that day. So I was sitting in a really high-level meeting, and one person, there was no other Asian person in the room. Personne asiatique dans la salle.
I was the only one. I was the only Asian woman there. And somebody insulted him. The sheriff said, oh, it was a bad day.
A white man in the room expressed, oh, I can't believe the sheriff said that guy was just having a bad day. And I wanted to turn to him and say, like, I absolutely can believe this with all of my being. Je voulais tellement me tourner vers lui et dire,
I wanted to turn to him and say, I'm not surprised at all. Of course I can believe this.
My silence that day was about keeping myself safe. My silence that day was not breaking down in a meeting. My silence that day was not, frankly, losing it on a colleague because they hadn't done anything wrong. But it's like, if that's my capacity, I was like in the negative, you know? C'était vraiment une question de mon silence me protège dans ce moment.
My silence was there to protect me, not because I didn't want to talk about the violence against women, but I didn't want to put myself in a situation where I would be spending energy in talking about violence instead of mourning them.
Time to grieve, and I think sometimes like that's where that spectrum of silence is super important, and it calls in power and privilege. Like how many of us have been at a dinner table where one of our relatives says something super not okay? Comme on est dans un lieu où
You're at a dinner table and somebody says that's something that you don't like.
Experience speech about this is how offensive what you just said is. C'est vraiment pas le moment de
So you're not going to start quoting Shakespeare, but
countering that silence is just, not laughing. Sometimes countering that silence is just raising your eyebrows, which I can't do because I just got Botox.
But the idea isn't necessarily to have a verbal exchange, but you can at least discourage the person through body language. And we realize that we have to think of our safety.
Into consideration that spectrum of like, sometimes it doesn't need to be the loudest voice in the room to counter something. It can mean like following up with someone after a meeting and be like, hey, you know what? I don't know if you know this, they use the they, them pronouns or something like that. Like that silence can be used in a way that calls people in rather than sort of putting everyone else in that room in a potential zone of a lack of safety.
Well, that's also a question of alliance, isn't it? And who's going to say something? What do allies do?
That white man who says to the sexist remark, dude, that's fucked up.
Yeah.
Incredible power. So please continue to do good in the world, those of you who are being the one who in the lunchroom says, that joke's not funny, man. Because it's much more powerful coming from you than us. Yeah. I recognize this delegate. I see this delegate wants to speak again. I'm also mindful of the time, so I'll ask everybody to be as brief as they can. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate, my name's Risa Cronabush. I really appreciate everybody coming here today on the panel and speaking your truth and being candid, and I appreciate your hearts. I have a comment and then a question. My daughter, when she was in grade 11, she's biracial. She's African American and Caucasian. And she was really upset because they would celebrate Multicultural Day, but they were doing nothing about Black History Month. So a small little change we were talking about earlier, a small little idea or a small little seed to plant and help it grow. I told her to start printing out articles or interesting historical Black history and put it on her locker. And she found that there was actually students starting to collect and read what she was putting on her locker every day. And that made change also in the school that she was going to, that the next year they started to celebrate Black history. So a small little gesture had a big impact. And one of the things I was wondering is, I was speaking with somebody of color, and they're tired of explaining their culture and their skin, and they felt that it should be up to those who are not of color to find out for them fucking selves. Like, they're really getting tired. So my question is, like, how do you keep going? Like, how do you keep answering those questions over and over again? And do you ever get tired? And if you do, how do you rejuvenate?
I'll go.
Danny.
Gosh, I don't. I say to people to fuck off. I really do. I really, truly do. Like, thank you. There is a time and space where I'm happy to talk about my culture, and God knows I'm obsessed with my culture. I love Syrian heritage. I love Syrian stories. I can tell you about the history of colonization in my region like I am reading to you from a history book. I know it all. But if it's 6:30 in the morning and I'm having my first cup of coffee at Starbucks and you come and knock on my shoulder, which actually really happened, and you're like, hey, where are you from? I'll be like, fuck off. That's literally my answer to that. That is literally my answer to that. I have no, I also got in the habit of being like, Where do you think I'm from? And then see what happens. See the kind of mental hoops that they will jump in. I don't bother, fuck that. I honestly don't bother. When I'm ready to tell you about my culture, you'll hear all about it. If I'm not ready to tell you about my culture, I might flip you the finger. Cool, awesome. Thank you.
I'm going to give a shout out to our president to make her way to the stage for the next little bit that's happening soon. And I'll give folks a chance to answer that question as a wrap up or to talk about hope, anything that gives you hope. Carmen?
Hope. I have a lot of hope. Like, one of the things we say at BACO is like, we believe in radical hope. I don't know why I get emotional every time I think about it. Mais l'espoir radical, c'est...
Radical hope is something that has helped me move forward.
Now I'm gonna cry. My dad is Chinese, and his ancestors paid the head tax. Donc les ancêtres de mon père ont payé ce qu'on appelle the head tax.
They paid the head tax.
Qui l'ont dû payer. But I think of how far we have come, not because like society wanted us to come this far, but because of people like my dad's ancestors who operated a cafe in Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan, and that was their act of resistance. Leur résistance n'était pas politique, ce n'était
They didn't do any politics, but they just wanted to exist. They opened a coffee shop in Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan. They knew that they would have white clients. They were going to have Aboriginals.
And like, that's what gives me hope. I think back I hear stories of how when they immigrated to Canada, they had to live in like essentially a frozen apartment because they couldn't afford heating. Leur appartement n'avait pas de chaleur, donc il y avait...
They didn't have any heating, and so they had ice in the apartment.
The fact that like we're able to sit on the stage and talk to each other, and like even talking to you being like mixed and biracial, like it's such a powerful thing that like resistance has gotten us this far. Yeah. And I think of the attention we bring to these kinds of conversations, and I have so much hope about where we're going to go. And I think sometimes it's not that it's easier to show how hard we're working, but it's almost like we're in this rush to prove of like how much work I've done to make this place better. And it's like, look at how far we've come. Look at how much joy I have in the moments where I get to talk about being myself and existing in all these intersections. Et je pense que vraiment...
So I have so much hope for myself, but also for my children.
Some incredible things, and I know that it's not just changes on the horizon, change is happening, right? Like, imagine trying to have this 20 years ago. People would be like, we have a woman and a man, and they're both cis, and that's our equity audit, and like, it's gonna be fun and fine, but like, I don't know, we all bring with us like a backpack full of amazing things, and it's gonna turn into one of those hiking backpacks and just get bigger, you know?
Yeah.
I'm gonna let Joulene wrap us up.
For sharing that. For those who don't know, my mom went to residential school, as is my grandmother as well. So she met my dad when she ran away for the second time of leaving a residential school in Saskatchewan. And my dad was running, his family immigrated because they were running restaurants in the middle of nowhere. So he loves hunting and fishing, and she loves Chinese food. So it was an interesting connection and miss. And you know, they love to dance. So he was like, I'm going to the next town to open a restaurant there. Want to go? And they met out dancing, right? So it's like the seconds and inches of me even being here. Like I mean, sure, you guys pretty progressive union know about the Orange Shirt Day, and you know the shoes on the residential school, right? Like for me, I have that experience of, you know, there by the grace of God go by. Because I could, in theory, have not been here because of that. And yet I get to see my sister grow up with her children, proud of the culture. And to me, that's a big deal, right? So celebrating the things that were pushed out, and you know that we like we're still here, right? Like that's a big deal. So, you know, I learned from that years ago, and it's still like we get to celebrate. We get to like practicing beating and dancing and celebrating life of those who are still here. So yeah.
Delegate Mike 3, we're getting close to time, so I'm going to let you speak, but hopefully it's not going to be a question that you want everyone to answer, because we're going to be here all night otherwise.
Wow, okay, I'll hold it back then. I just wanted to challenge Danny on something that you mentioned that stuck with me. You mentioned that we ask marginalized people too much. I would challenge you and say that some people don't ask marginalized people enough. Like, I'm an activist, I'm a disability activist. I'll be an activist until the day I keel over in that chair. So I just wanted to challenge you on that, saying, you can never ask me enough. And just one more thing. I don't want to take away your thunder, Adrienne, but Danny, what gives you hope?
Oh. You. Right now.
So we are getting close to the end of convention, which is really cool and also somewhat heartbreaking, because I feel like I just want us to keep going. I want us to thank Adrienne and Carmen and Danny and Joulene and Dan for sharing their stories.